In the quiet dawn of the medieval world, the story begins with people who lived constantly on the edge of survival, where every sunrise meant endurance and every meal meant life itself. This opening part sets the emotional foundation by pulling the listener into a time when hunger was not an idea, but a presence that walked beside every man, woman, and child. Mist hangs low over muddy fields, church bells echo faintly through cold air, and simple wooden homes breathe smoke from their thatched roofs. This world was shaped by soil, seasons, and faith, and the diet of medieval people was not built on choice or luxury, but on knowledge passed silently from one generation to the next. Grain was more than food, it was hope, and bread was not just baked, but earned through aching backs, blistered hands, and relentless labor. The sound of stone grinding grain filled cottages, while the smell of dark, coarse bread rose slowly from clay ovens. This food sustained bodies through freezing winters and endless toil, and it carried within it forgotten wisdom. People ate what the land allowed them, and their survival depended on understanding how to stretch nourishment across months of scarcity. Thick stews simmered for hours, combining roots, grains, herbs, and bones, pulling every possible strength from simple ingredients. There was no waste, only respect for what nature gave. The opening part also reveals how modern eyes misunderstand medieval life, seeing only hardship while missing the resilience built into daily habits. These people walked miles, worked fields from dawn to dusk, and yet endured for centuries because their diet matched their world. Fermented foods preserved strength through winter, salted fish connected inland villages to distant seas, and ale, safer than water, gave calories and comfort. The rhythm of eating followed the rhythm of seasons, and fasting was not starvation, but strategy, allowing stores to last and bodies to adapt. As wind rattled shutters and wolves howled beyond village light, food became the silent hero of survival. This first part builds tension by showing how fragile life was and how close death always stood, yet it also shows quiet intelligence in survival methods. Shaped by experience rather than science books, monasteries kept gardens alive through snow. Peasants knew which weeds healed and which killed, and every loaf carried the memory of famine survived. Emotionally, this part invites the listener to feel respect rather than pity, to smell the bread, hear the crackle of fire, and understand that this forgotten diet was not primitive but perfectly tuned to its time. It sets the stage for a deeper journey into how food held society together, how it defined class, survival, faith, and endurance, and how in the shadow of castles, forests, and endless fields, people stayed alive not by abundance, but by understanding. As the sun climbs higher over the medieval landscape, the story deepens, and part 2 moves beyond the village hearth into the wider world, where food shaped power, faith, and endurance in ways rarely remembered today. The diet that kept people alive was not the same for all, and yet it followed the same quiet logic of survival carved into stone and soil. Within castle walls, long tables groaned under bread, trenchers, dried meats, and thick pottages, while servants moved silently between flickering torches and echoing halls. Even here, excess was an illusion, because preservation mattered more than pleasure, and salt, smoke, and time were the true masters of the medieval kitchen. Beyond the walls, monasteries stood like islands of knowledge, where monks rose before dawn, tending gardens in frost and rain, understanding the healing strength of lentils, leeks, herbs, and honey. Their food was humble but carefully balanced, built to sustain prayer, labor, and long hours of silence. This was a world without refrigeration, where memory replaced measurement and taste replaced written recipes. Peasants, nobles, and monks alike depended on preservation techniques that turned survival into an art form, drying grains in lofts, smoking fish in wooden sheds, fermenting cabbage and barley in dark corners. All of it guided by experience rather than science. Winter was the true enemy, and every meal eaten in summer carried the shadow of cold months ahead. The emotional weight of this part lies in the constant awareness of time running forward towards scarcity. Women stirred pots slowly, knowing a careless hand could waste days of labor, and children learned early that hunger was a teacher, not a punishment. The forgotten diet was built on endurance foods that released energy, slowly keeping bodies warm during long hours in fields, forests, and workshops. Animal fat was valued, not feared, and bones were boiled again and again until nothing remained to give. The sound of cleavers on wood, the hiss of fat on iron, and the scent of smoke clinging to cloth formed the background of daily life. Faith also shaped the plate, as fasting days forced creativity rather than weakness, pushing people toward fish, grains, and vegetables that sustained without excess. This part reveals how scarcity sharpened wisdom, and how the medieval diet was a system designed not for comfort, but for continuity. Survival depended on cooperation, shared ovens, shared mills, and shared knowledge, binding communities together through food. When famine came, it was not ignorance that failed them, but nature itself. And yet even then people adapted, stretching roots, grinding bark, and trusting traditions older than memory. Part 2 deepens the sense of resilience, showing that the medieval diet was not static but flexible, shaped by geography, climate, and belief. And through this living system, generations endured wars, plagues, and winters that would break modern bodies. It leaves the listener with a growing realization that survival was not accidental, but earned through patience, discipline, and an unbroken relationship with the land. As shadows lengthen and the medieval world moves toward evening, Part 3 draws the listener into the moments when survival was tested most fiercely, during famine, sickness, and uncertainty, when the true strength of the forgotten diet revealed itself. This was the age of plagues, failed harvests, and bitter winters, where the line between life and death narrowed to the contents of a pot. The diet that had sustained generations became a shield against collapse, not because it was rich, but because it was resilient. People relied on foods that could be stored, transformed, and revived even after months of darkness. Dried peas, barley, and rye soaked slowly over fire, releasing nourishment that filled bellies and steadied hearts. Broth became medicine, and bread became memory, tying the present to ancestors who had survived before. The soundscape of this part is quieter, heavier, with the wind howling through empty fields and the distant toll of church bells marking loss. Yet within homes fires still burned and hands still worked, grinding, soaking, fermenting, refusing to surrender to despair. Women passed down knowledge in whispers, teaching daughters how to stretch a meal, how to read the smell of grain before mold could climb it, and how to use herbs to strengthen the weak. The medieval diet was deeply tied to the body, not through abundance but through adaptation, as people understood how food interacted with labor, seasons, and illness long before modern nutrition existed. Fat was survival fuel during cold months, while simple carbohydrates powered long walks and heavy tools. Even in sickness, gruels and broths were chosen not randomly but with purpose. This part also reveals how communal eating strengthened survival, as families and neighbors shared what little they had because isolation meant death. Ovens became gathering points, and shared meals became acts of resistance against hunger. Emotionally, this section leans into loss but also quiet defiance, as people continued to plant even after famine, continued to bake even after death passed through their doors. The medieval diet was not just about staying alive physically, but about maintaining dignity, routine, and hope. The crackle of fire, the rhythm of stirring, and the warmth of shared food created moments of normality in a collapsing world. Through this lens, the listener begins to understand that the forgotten diet was as much psychological as nutritional, grounding people in tradition when everything else failed. Part 3 carries a deep sense of endurance, showing that survival was not heroic in grand gestures, but in daily choices repeated endlessly despite fear. And as night settles over the medieval landscape, this part prepares the ground for reflection on what modern society is lost by, severing its bond with food that once carried both survival and meaning. As the final light fades, and the medieval world settles into silence, Part 4 turns toward reflection, revealing how this forgotten diet slowly disappeared as centuries moved forward, and how its wisdom was buried beneath comfort, progress, and abundance. The listener is carried from torchlit kitchens and communal ovens into a changing world where trade expanded, cities grew, and food became separated from the land that once defined it. Mills grew larger, bread became whiter, and diets shifted away from endurance toward convenience, altering bodies in ways medieval people would never have recognized. The old rhythm of seasons, fasting, and scarcity was broken, and with it the deep understanding of balance was lost. This part carries a sense of quiet tragedy as survival knowledge earned through centuries of hardship faded, not because it failed, but because it was no longer needed in the same way. Yet the human body did not change as quickly as the food that fed it. The medieval diet had trained bodies to work, endure cold, and recover from hunger, while modern abundance introduced excess without resilience. Emotionally, this section contrasts the strength of the past with the fragility of the present, without judgment, but with gravity. The sound of iron forges and wooden mills slowly gives way to silence as the listener realizes that survival once demanded participation, awareness, and respect for limits. This diet was not perfect, but it was honest, rooted in necessity rather than desire. Part 4 draws attention to how food once connected communities through shared labor, shared ovens, and shared scarcity, while modern eating often isolates individuals from both source and meaning. The warmth of communal meals once strengthened bonds that could not be replaced by individual comfort. As the narration deepens, it becomes clear that the forgotten medieval diet was never about nostalgia but about harmony with environment, effort, and time. The final emotional weight comes from recognizing that people survived not because life was easier, but because they adapted deeply to it. The crackle of fire and smell of bread become symbols of endurance rather than poverty. This concluding part leaves the listener standing between worlds, one built on survival wisdom and one built on convenience, asking quietly what has been gained and what has been lost. The medieval people did not live long lives by modern standards. Yet they lived lives embedded in rhythm, purpose, and resilience. And as darkness fully settles, the final feeling is not sadness but respect for a way of eating that carried humanity through centuries of uncertainty and kept them alive when survival itself was an act of courage. As the final echoes of the medieval world fade into memory, the last part returns to the present, carrying the weight of everything that came before and asking the listener to stand still and listen to what history has been trying to say. The forgotten medieval diet was never written as a rule book, yet it shaped Boda's minds and communities through patience, necessity, and awareness. This closing passage draws a quiet line between then and now, not to glorify hardship but to recognize endurance as a lost skill. In the medieval world, food demanded attention because survival depended on it, and that attention created a relationship with eating that was deeply human. People knew the cost of every loaf because they felt it in their muscles, their time, and their seasons. Today, food often arrives without story, without struggle, and without memory, and something vital has thinned as a result. The final part carries a reflective tone, like walking through ancient ruins at dusk, where the stones still hold warmth from a long-vanished fire. The medieval diet teaches that strength did not come from abundance, but from alignment between body, labor, climate, and restraint. People ate to work, to survive, to endure cold and loss, and their meals reflected that purpose. Modern bodies, surrounded by constant availability, often lack the resilience that scarcity once trained quietly and consistently. Emotionally, this part invites respect rather than imitation, urging the listener to understand rather than copy. The crackle of torches and scent of dark bread return as symbols of a time when food anchored life rather than distracted from it. The medieval people endured plagues, wars, and famine, yet built cultures that lasted centuries because their daily habits, including eating, were shaped by reality, not excess. The final movement of the narration slows, allowing space for the idea that progress does not always mean improvement, and that forgetting can be as dangerous as hunger. This part does not condemn the present, but gently questions it, asking what it means to be nourished, not just fed. Survival today looks different, yet the human body still carries ancient expectations shaped by thousands of years of endurance eating. The medieval diet reminds us that patience, moderation, and respect for limits once kept entire societies alive. As the imagined camera pulls back from fields, castles, and forests now silent, the listener is left with a powerful understanding that the past still breathes beneath modern life. The forgotten diet was not about suffering, but about survival with dignity and awareness. And in that final, quiet moment, as wind moves through tall grass and the echo of a distant bell fades, the story closes. Not with answers, but with a sense of continuity, reminding us that the wisdom that once kept people alive for centuries has not vanished. It waits, remembered in fragments, ready to be understood again.